I have some food aversions, but I've never really thought of myself as a picky eater. But come to think of it, I won't touch raw oysters, got sick from them once, or goat cheese. I've tried many times, can't do it. And I no longer put cream in my coffee, lactose. And I also don't eat meat because I am mostly vegetarian. So maybe I am a picky eater. Well, what about you? I'm Joy Cardine. This is the Ideas Network. We are going to talk about the science and psychology of adult picky eaters. Because while picky eating is pretty common among kids, it seems many grow out of it, but not everyone does. So what's the deal with that? What's going on? And what are your food dislikes? Are you an adult picky eater? 1-800-642-1234 or send an email to talk@wpr.org. You can also post on the Joy Cardine Show Facebook page or tweet us at Joy Cardine Show. Let me welcome our guest. Nancy Zucker is an associate professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Duke University and the director of the Duke Center for Eating Disorders. She was featured in a recent article in the New York Times, When the Picky Eater is a Grown-Up. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, picky eating is kind of a broad term. How do you define it?
I define it as individuals who eat a narrow range of foods, and they usually have trouble eating outside of those foods, so they have a lot of trouble trying new foods. And when it gets to be extreme, those narrow range of foods, it starts to interfere with their functioning. It gets in their way.
Yeah. Is a picky eater someone with an eating disorder?
Not always, but can be.
Yeah. So is someone like me who I can't stand raw oysters, goat cheese, or cream in my coffee, am I a picky eater, or is that just I don't like a few things?
Yeah, I would say given what you presented, that right now you just don't like a few things.
And are people picky eaters because they don't like a lot of things? Is it just that they don't like the taste, or what do we know what's going on?
Yeah, no, I think what's really interesting about it is that the people that I work with who are picky eaters, it goes beyond not liking things, and they actually find, whether it's because they're so sensitive to smells and textures of foods, they actually find foods to be disgusting.
Ah, well, I have to admit, those raw oysters border on that.
I have to admit that I'm with you on the oyster thing.
Yeah. This is not to be confused with people who have food allergies, correct?
That is correct. But it is interesting that some of the people that I work with who come to me because of picky eating, sometimes they do have had food allergies that were undiagnosed.
Well, I used to think of my, I shouldn't say this, he's probably listening. My husband, it is public now, he does not like onions and garlic. And it's really hard to cook anything without onions and garlic. I don't know if you've noticed. But
yeah, that is true. I agree with you.
But it turns out that it's not just that he's a picky eater and doesn't like onions or garlic. It's that they really gave him, stomach upset.
Yep.
A lot of stomach upset. And then I finally did a little bit of reading, and while he hasn't been formally diagnosed with it, I think he's got an intolerance or something to onions and garlic. It seems that that's a thing.
Yeah, no, I think that there's, in terms of exploring a little bit more the reasons why people have these picky eating, you hear stories like that all the time, where there's these real biological vulnerabilities that you just didn't know about.
Yeah.
Until you looked further.
Yeah. So anyway, we're talking about someone who doesn't have a food allergy and finds a lot of food disgusting and only will eat a very narrow range of food. Give us an example. An adult picky eater who.
Yeah. So they usually there are differences, but I would say universally processed carbs are usually pretty safe for picky eaters. So like cookies, crackers, but the most popular is oftentimes French fries.
Oh.
And I think that the reason for that, so a lot of these, they're really sensitive to texture. So when you chew a cookie or a cracker, it crumbles in your mouth. And some folks who are picky eaters can't even that feeling of crumbling like is really intolerable for them. So French fries are, they're not aversive to look at. They're kind of plain, and when you bite them, they're just not a lot happens. They're pretty easy.
Well, now I also know people who aren't quite that severe, where they might only eat French fries or, but that they sort of have their stuff. They like their oatmeal in the morning. Maybe they'll have, I don't know, a sandwich at lunch, but they don't want to branch out, and they don't want, they don't want to try guacamole or other new foods. They just kind of have the typical things that they have every day, and they don't really branch out. Is that a picky eater?
It might be, but it depends on whether it's getting in their way or not. So I always say, there's always the mother-in-law test, right? Could you go to your mother-in-law's and could you suffer through it, so as not to hurt her feelings if she, if you have to eat something kind of awful. So it's kind of they suffer through. And my picky eaters, they couldn't. I mean, they would actually gag.
Ah, all right. So it's more than maybe we should talk a little bit about it. I mean, is it the dangers, the risks, the social inconvenience of being a picky eater? So that's one of the things, is that it's really embarrassing to eat in front of people.
Yeah, I think that when you're a kid who's a picky eater, I don't think the social stuff doesn't get in your way very much, because they're eating foods that are pretty kid friendly, and so if they go to birthday parties or things like that, it's likely that there'll be fries or something that they can eat. But the older you get, the more it gets in your way socially, and that's where I first got into this. Is people were presenting for treatment because it was getting in the way of business. They were worried about job interviews where they'd have to go on business dinners and dating and all these other kind of things where they were just embarrassed, that they would have to order, chicken fingers.
Yeah. So do we know? Let's kind of start at the beginning. Do we know what causes picky eating in the first place?
We don't, but I think we're learning more. I think one of the things that keeps coming up is that there's a subset of people that are very sensitive to taste and smells, and that have a very, what I call, highly refined disgust system. So they're just, and disgust is a really interesting emotion that is designed to protect us from diseases, right? So we avoid things that are disgusting because they could carry germs or forms of contamination. So that there's just a group of people that are more sensitive to noticing potential sources of contamination, and that gets in the way of their eating.
I'm there. I mean, again, oysters and goat cheese. But they smell and they could carry contamination.
That's right. There you go. So that's, oyster, and then there's some truth to that.
Well, but let's start. Are most picky eaters, does that start in childhood?
I would say that from what we understand, absolutely.
Yeah, and what is so a child isn't necessarily thinking, oh boy, that raw oyster might be contaminated. What's going on with the child?
Yeah, and I would say even the adults aren't thinking that way. Like, this is a system that kind of operates pretty automatically. But that they, that there's something about that their senses are picking up that something aversive about the smell and the way it looks. Like they're really good at noticing flaws in food, right? So even with French fries, which are relatively safe, how sometimes you get like a brown part on a fry.
Yep.
Like for some of these folks, right, they wouldn't be able to eat that fry.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Yeah, and I knew someone, I'm not going to name her for privacy reasons, but she loved her fries, that's for sure. But as a young girl, she wouldn't. A vegetable would not touch her lips. She just, and I mean, I'm thinking, she would eat corn. I'm sorry, she would eat corn, and that was it. And so she would eat fries and carbs and corn, and she would never fruits and vegetables. Just she couldn't tolerate them, or at least she just wouldn't do it.
Yeah, and that's it. I mean, you nailed it. That's the most popular. Those are the most common groups that are avoided. Vegetables is the highest. Fruits are pretty high, and protein as well. A lot of meats are avoided. So so with the kids and with the adults, what you worry about is that they're not getting any fiber. Mm-hmm. Or enough fiber, and so we're getting increasing evidence that there's a lot of GI difficulties and constipation in the kid. So you get this vicious cycle of where you just feel uncomfortable on your stomach and you just don't feel like eating, and so eating becomes more and more aversive.
Isn't that something? And you are the lead author of a study in 2015 that linked picky eating in preschoolers with emotional problems. So there's a link there?
Yeah, we found that kids, and we were trying to answer with the question was kind of when to worry. Because is it these kind of moderately selective eaters, but this is what I define in the beginning. These kids that eat with a narrow range of foods, what are they like? And so we looked at whether they had any psychiatric symptoms or disorders, and we looked at a severe group that was about 3%, and then a moderate group that was about 17%. And in the severe group, they actually had they were twice as likely to have a diagnosis of depression or social anxiety. But both groups had higher levels of symptoms like anxiety, depression, ADHD.
Interesting. So this girl grew out of it, and she eats vegetables now. But do most people grow out of this picky eating trend or situation? I would say that the majority do. And I think that what's hard is that we don't have good data so that we can tell parents that your kid is going to be one who doesn't grow out of it, right? So it leaves us in kind of a lurch in terms of, advising parents. I think one of the things that's tricky is in the research done on this, when they ask parents, is your child a picky eater? And parents answer like never, sometimes, always. Oftentimes they group together the kids that are sometimes picky with those who are always picky, and that's a pretty diverse group. And I think that's why we're still so confused about picky eating. Yeah. So do we know how common picky eating is in adults? We don't know. Mm-hmm. We don't know. When they've tried to look at persistence over time in kids and adolescents, that's the best data that we have, and that ends up being about 4%. Yeah. And do we believe that adults who are picky eaters are also linked with various emotional problems? I think that from the studies that are out there and what I've seen clinically, that social anxiety is pretty likely, right? And you never know the chicken and the egg with that, right? Whether they were socially anxious, so it made them more self-conscious about their eating, or just because they're eating, because there's so many concerns about their eating that they become more anxious in social situations, which is probably more likely. Mm-hmm. So are you going to, or are you doing any research when it comes to the adult picky eater? Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I get emails from people all the time, telling me these pretty, I know you'll be taking callers, but telling some pretty heart-wrenching stories, just about what it's like to have something for which everyone else, doesn't understand, and two, thinks that you're just acting like a kid. You know what I mean? Like, kind of get over it, move on with it. And so it's really humiliating for a lot of adults. Well, we will talk to some callers about picky eating and as adults, and for that matter, if you have a question about how it affects children too, that's okay. 1-800-642-1234, or send an email to talk@wpr.org. You can also post on the Joy Cardeen Show Facebook page or tweet us at Joy Cardeen Show. We are talking with Nancy Zucker, Associate Professor of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Duke University, the Director of the Duke Center for Eating Disorders. She has doing a lot of research on picky eaters, lead author of a study in 2015 that linked picky eating in some preschoolers with emotional problems. She was quoted in and featured in a recent New York Times article, "When the Picky Eater is a Grown-Up." I'm Joy Cardeen. This is the Ideas Network. We are talking about picky eating, especially among adults, and wonder if you consider yourself a picky eater and why that is. If you have any questions for our guest, 1-800-642-1234 or send an email to talk@wpr.org. And if you are a picky eater, talk about what that means to you, how it affects you. Do you suffer any sorts of social embarrassment over this? 1-800-642-1234 or send an email to talk@wpr.org. You can also post on the Joy Cardine Show Facebook page. Well, we have an email from Chris in Sun Prairie who says, Joy, your husband is not alone. I have an acquaintance who has a severe intolerance to garlic, which gives him severe gastric distress. He has cousins in Norway with the same condition, a grandfather who had a full-blown allergy to garlic. This friend has to make special requests at restaurants and simply tells them he has an allergy because if he stated an intolerance, he might not be taken seriously. All right, thanks very much. We have another caller on garlic and onions, but I'm gonna mention that we're saying that that's not being a picky eater necessarily. Hi, Valerie.
Good morning.
Yes, you do consider yourself a picky eater?
I do, and it's kind of come from a interesting diagnosis. I thought it was just because I was pregnant and blaming it all on hormones. But I actually found out that I had a parasite, a digestive parasite. And
oh my gosh.
It was because of that I became intolerant to a lot of things, so much so that the smells and the taste became disgusting, like you had mentioned. So, yeah, I wasn't a picky eater, but I'm becoming one, and it's mostly because I value not having the digestive upset at all times.
Well, that's something. And you know what? I've heard about that during pregnancy. My mother told me about how certain foods, she loved coffee and she couldn't drink coffee, even if she might not have, maybe you weren't supposed to, but she just couldn't do it because of the smell was so enhanced. Professor Zucker, what about the pregnancy and even a food parasite causing Valerie to be a picky eater?
Yeah, no, I think that's such an interesting story. I think what it raises is, what happens when, we eat a food, right, and then we feel awful. We get sick and we vomit afterwards. There's this thing called conditioned taste aversion that is, once a food makes you sick, it's really hard, as Valerie was saying, to kind of get past that and never eat it again, right? We've all got our memories of kind of getting sick on a specific food, and we're just like, oh, I'll never eat that. And so when she was pregnant and it was happening to such a wide range of foods, it makes sense that she has this kind of generalized, aversive reaction to these foods. So that's really tough.
Yeah. And, I said that, we didn't necessarily, because we have a lot of people who wanted to comment on onions and garlic, and that's just having an intolerance does not mean you're a picky eater. But I will say that there's a certain amount of fear and distress over, is there going to be some hidden onions and garlic in this and that and the other thing? And so there is, there's a little bit more pressure on someone who has that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And some of the psychological things, right, that someone with an intolerance or an outright food allergy experiences is similar to what a picky eater has in terms of just kind of worrying about food, this kind of lack of control of how things will be prepared and having to navigate that socially. There's some real similarities across those things.
Yeah.
So I can see why you had a bunch of onion and garlic callers.
I'm glad to know. Rob will be glad to know he's not alone. Let's go to Daniel in Toma now. Hi, Daniel.
Hi. Well, the reason I called, I got a couple things. One, when I was younger, I ate ketchup big time. I can't even eat ketchup anymore. Like Hunt's ketchup is really bad. Another thing that's changed on me is I don't eat corn as much because I had appendicitis from eating too much corn. And so my habits changed. And then I won't eat rice because I was raised on rice because we were so poor.
Oh.
And then another thing I got really sick on, I got colon cancer off Mountain Dew.
Well, I'm sorry for everything you've gone through, Daniel, but I'm not sure that claim is necessarily proven by science. Corn giving you appendicitis and soda giving you colon cancer. But do you have any comments, Professor Zucker?
Yeah, I mean the point. One thing that makes me think of is that one thing that's interesting about picky eaters is For most of us, we have to eat a variety of foods to get all our nutritional needs. So, so if you make like a casserole on Sunday and you eat it all during the week, by Friday you're pretty sick of it and don't want to think about lasagna for like a couple weeks. And then about 3 weeks later, you're like, oh, I think I'll make some lasagna. But for picky eaters, the interesting thing about them is they don't seem to get sick of foods. Like they're eating like you mentioned your friend who eats the same oatmeal for breakfast. They eat the same things for years. And then what parents reply when I see clinically is then they'll get tired of it, just like this caller, and then they'll never be able to go back to it.
Yeah. Thank you, Daniel, for the call. Carrie in Rhinelander. Hi, Carrie.
Good morning, Joy.
Good morning.
Yeah, just curious for your guest, how many of these people in your studies and research are just plain picky? Picky tends to have negative connotations, childlike connotations, and I know I would consider myself a pickier eater, and I found that I don't really have any real reasons, allergies, digestive issues to not want to eat certain foods. But I do find that if I force myself to try certain things, I kind of get over it. And I wonder or acquire a taste for things. I wonder how many people is there demographic of people that just kind of got to try things, and it's ignorance that's causing them to be more picky.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I think that those folks, like I mentioned earlier, like we don't really understand the folks that can kind of grow out of it and the ones that can't. Excuse me, and I think that. Being able to...
Let me jump in and let you take a drink of water, Nancy Zucker. As I remind listeners, we are talking about picky eating and picky eaters. Our conversation was prompted by a recent article in the New York Times, When the Picky Eater is a Grown-Up, and we're wondering if you consider yourself to be a picky eater, or if, for that matter, we can talk about picky eating in childhood as well. Are you concerned about a child who is a picky eater? Will your child grow out of this or not? 1-800-642-1234. What do you do to try to encourage yourself to eat new foods or to expand your diet? And for that matter, your children as well. 1-800-642-1234, or send an email to talk@wpr.org. You can also post on the Joy Cardine Show Facebook page or tweet us at Joy Cardine Show. It's kind of funny because Carrie's question was, so how much of this picky eating is just because you're picky?
Yeah, no, I think there's absolutely a group of people just like that they're picky, but it doesn't get in their way, and they have to push themselves a little bit, but then they can eat a whole range of new foods.
Yeah. And in fact, I ran into someone at a function who it was a dinner type function, and like I said, I actually had to be catered to a little bit because I'm a mostly vegetarian, and so I was at this function, making demands, and this other woman who was there was she even said, I'm a picky eater, and the reason I'm here is I want to try these new things because I'm trying to get over it. And so she was consciously considered herself a picky eater. I don't know if she only ate French fries, but I mean, so that's what she was doing, is that she was consciously ordering some new things off of the menu and trying some pretty exotic foods that were being served at this function in an effort to broaden her horizons and to get over the picky eating. Any thoughts on whether that's a good technique?
No, it sounds terrific. I mean, I think that one of the things that is a point that raises is just how when an adult picky eater decides that they want to work on it, they have to work really hard. And they have to be deliberate like that, and really, almost like an exercise routine, in terms of kind of having program practices and stuff. So good for that woman. I mean, it takes a real commitment to do it. It's not easy, right? Because they have to try the foods oftentimes over and over again, and it's not like they are liking the foods, right? They have to just kind of they're doing it to kind of to be able to endure the foods, to not let the foods get in their way. And then what we still have trouble understanding is if they've tried the foods like 50 times, do they actually get to a point where they enjoy the foods, or is it just that they're able to tolerate the foods?
Yeah, that's true. Well, I'll say that, and you can tell me, when I was a kid, I I pretty much ate everything, I think. And my mother made me eat spinach, which I didn't appreciate, but I ate it. And I didn't like it then. I really did not like it then. And I don't know who would like that frozen spinach that's just, but now I love it. So what happened there?
Yeah, I think our taste, so there's I think a bunch of different things change. One is the context around eating. So there's like foods get value because we appreciate that spinach, is so healthy for us, and this and that and the other, and our flavor profiles change, in terms of we get our, if you think about some of the sickeningly sweet things that you had as a kid, probably now as an adult, eating a chocolate fudge Pop-Tart, you're like, oh, really? For breakfast, but so some of them just change as a result of development and getting older. But I think that the social aspects and our knowledge of the health aspects of food influence how we value foods as well.
Yeah. Let's go to another caller. We'll take Paula in Eau Claire now. Hi, Paula.
Hi, I was wondering how much environment played a factor in picky eaters. For example, I know growing up I had 5 other siblings, and whatever my mom made, that's what we ate. I know in other families, they might make 2 or 3 different meals for each family member, depending on if they like what was served. Just wondering how that plays a part in picky eaters.
Yeah, so are we coddling our picky eaters or creating them by doing this, Nancy Zucker?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and one of my main missions is to try to take the blame away from parents, because I think that what I see clinically is within the same family, you've got an incredibly adventurous eater and then a very severe picky eater. And what we're increasingly learning from research is that the features of our children kind of draw out different parenting styles. Right. So, and that may be, to the reader's point, are they catering? But I think it's really challenging. And we don't have we haven't been good about giving parents good advice about this. But like if you feed your child the food and they keep gagging, like what are you supposed to do, right? Do you keep watching your kid gag? If you're a sensitive parent, you're going to try to find things that your kid likes. And so it's these really well-intended parents are doing the best that they can, and their kids are genuinely struggling to eat a wide variety.
Yeah, so what advice might you have for a parent who has a child who, like the girl I was mentioning, just cannot eat vegetables, claim that they'd make her gag or that they even hurt her teeth, she said?
Yeah, no. So the caller that called in and says, what if you're just picky? If your child, if trying new foods is not stressful for your child, then you go in with your kind of good parental instincts and making new foods and having adventures around tasting foods. I don't think will seem quite natural for the picky eaters that I work with. One of the first things I tell parents to do is to make it so that trying a new food isn't expected at meal times. And the reason for that is because there's so many wonderful things that happen at family meals. There's good conversation. You learn teamwork. You learn manners. And for families that have a picky eater, mealtimes become a real battle, and everyone dreads them. And that's just an awful thing. And
so do this when it's not mealtime.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I mean, eat your veggies is something you can't just tell a picky eater, but how can you try to encourage a child who won't eat vegetables to eat vegetables, or don't you?
Well, I think you don't start there, right? Because you're working on building up willingness to try foods that are more comfortable and familiar. But but any interaction that your child has with a food in a positive context, whether it's helping you cook and cutting things and this and that and the other, is still a step towards feeling better about vegetables. Now, a picky eater is not, for some picky eaters, that might even not be the first step that you can do because the smell of it might be so bad that they have trouble even doing that. But these kind of noticing, smelling foods, playing with foods, all those things are steps in the right direction. And with vegetables, where we start is oftentimes, things like, you've seen those veggie sticks in the grocery store, things that are made with vegetables, but they look like French fries, they're salty, you start with foods that are close to what the child is already eating, and you kind of work up.
Sweet potato fries.
Exactly, right, absolutely. Things like that, right, same shape, similar flavor profile.
Yeah. What about hiding the vegetables in, I don't know, cornbread or smoothies or something?
Yeah, these kids can smell it out.
All right.
There's no trick in these kids, I don't think.
All right. Let's take another call from Lori in Minocqua. Hi, Lori.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call.
Yes, what is your story?
Well, my story is I have a daughter who doesn't eat fruits or vegetables.
There we go.
She drives me insane, and every day I don't even get the plate to the table. And she's like, oh, what is it? And the only fruit she'll eat is if it's ground up to a pulp, but she will not drink a smoothie. And she'll eat, like, applesauce and stuff. And if I give her something like, you know, a grape or try something, anything, I mean, this has been going on for, like, 10 years now, she'll just, like, put the grape in her mouth and gag. Or she'll, whatever it is. And it's like, even her banana, I mean, she'll eat the banana with the longest teeth you've ever seen. And she'll take the tiniest taste and chew it for, like, an hour and go the whole time.
Oh, my gosh. So, Lori, what does she eat? I'm just curious. Does she eat fries?
She will eat. She likes, well, of course, you know, she likes pancakes. She'll eat eggs. She, of course, a cheeseburger and fries, no problem. Meat was a huge challenge. She eats chicken, tons of chicken because she'll eat it. Now she'll eat beef and pork. Before it was like I'd make a roast. And literally, we'll sit there at the table for an hour, and this child will still not be eating, and it's driving me crazy.
Oh, wow. So that's that sounds familiar, Nancy Zucker.
Yeah, it sounds really familiar. But good for you. It sounds like you've made some headway. I mean, the fact that she eats scrambled eggs is a huge victory. A lot of kids really struggle with eggs and the meats too. Although it sounds like it's still.
I'm sorry, Lori?
I said we're getting somewhere, but it's so frustrating. And it's like, am I the only one? And I asked her, I'm like, but, you know, she'll eat, like, I buy her, like, baby fruit. We call it, like, sucking fruit, you know, because you open the package and they can suck it out. But, like, to eat an apple, it has to be cut like a potato chip, so thin. And, I mean, honestly, it's apples and it's maybe a banana, maybe applesauce. That's it as far as fruit goes. I can't get her to eat anything.
Yeah. So that sounds like a picky eater, Nancy Zucker, in maybe a little broader diet than just French fries. But so what does a parent do if you have a 10-year-old who cannot even eat a vegetable or a fruit? Do you think she'll grow out of it, or do you do something else?
Well, I think, the first thing that in terms of getting in your daughter's head, I think one of the things that's interesting about what it is about fruits and vegetables, right? So if we think of it, so these kids, they're, like, as I mentioned, they're really sensitive to smells, taste, but also to how things look, right? So it's just like their sensory system is just like hyper-tuned. And so for a lot of these kids, they need to know what to expect, and so they like things to be exactly the same as what they're used to. And the thing that's interesting about fruits and vegetables is, you've never eaten the same apple. Each apple is a bit different, right? And so I think for a lot of these kids, it's the taste, but also the fact that the visual appearance of things. So it's really interesting the way the mom described it, that her daughter makes her go through all these steps to have the visual appearance of the apple be the same every time.
And as thin as a potato chip.
Right, exactly, right. So that's kind of mapping on to things that the child likes and is familiar with.
Would a child that has this kind of a picky eating habit, I know it's individual, but let's say you cut up that apple and you bake it and you put a little cinnamon and sugar on it, maybe that's defeating some purpose. But, Lori, I'll ask you, I mean, will she do that if it's prepared in a desserty type fashion?
If I'm making like an apple pie and I'm doing the cinnamon sugar, she wouldn't eat it for the longest time. But now, her sister thinks it's a great idea. So now she'll move into that a little bit. And now when I'm making a pie, it's a good thing.
Okay.
But, I mean, it's insane. I'm at wit's end. I mean, and I ask her, and it doesn't matter. I mean, to put her in her mouth, and it's constantly she's going to throw up. And I'm like, what the heck?
Yeah, well, there's something that is just really repulsive about those fruits and vegetables to Lori's daughter, right, Nancy Zucker?
Yeah, and we work. There's a lot of steps to how we work with kids, but one of the things that I think is most helpful is, so your gag reflex is kind of in the center of your tongue, right? If you ever brush your tongue, right, sometimes you'll make yourself gag. And so one of the things that we play with the kids with is taking a really long fork and taking a very small bite, like the size of a Jelly Belly, of foods and putting on your back molars. Because if you do that, then you avoid your gag. Ah. And so it gives the kids a way to feel safer, right? It's not, because these kids get a little, they get a little scared of gagging, and some of them actually will throw up. And so giving them the power to say, like, actually, there's a way that you don't have to do that. Now, they won't taste the foods, and that's kind of a positive too. It gives them a sense of mastery. All right, try that, Lori. We have to take a short break, and then we'll take more calls for our guest, Nancy Zucker, Associate Professor of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Duke University, the Director of the Duke Center for Eating Disorders. We are talking about picky eaters, and not only children, but when the picky eater is a grown-up. She was quoted in a recent New York Times article on this subject, and we're talking about it now. 1-800-642-1234, or send an email to talk@wpr.org. Do you consider yourself to be a picky eater? Is there a food that you absolutely won't eat? How has being a picky eater affected you as an adult? We welcome your thoughts and questions. I'm Joy Cardine. This is the Ideas Network. We are talking about picky eaters. 1-800-642-1234, or send an email to talk@wpr.org if you have a question or a story to share. Talking with Nancy Zucker, who is an associate professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Duke University. Our next caller is Zach in Wapaka. Hello, Zach.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I am an incredibly picky eater. And I think it's part to do with my folks really had disgusting foods growing up, and my mom, God rest her soul, was not a great cook. So it was beets and liver and soles, which is pickled pig's feet, and blood sausage, and just a bunch of really disgusting things. And so I have a lifelong kind of picky eater problem. What I have found is a couple of strategies that really work well for me is not knowing what's in the food I'm trying. So if I hear the ingredients, I'm probably there's a really good chance I won't like it just because I have already a preconceived notion of what it's going to taste like. So a strategy that my wife and I have is I don't know what's in the food. So I try everything. I don't know what's in it. I've found through that strategy that I actually don't like red and green peppers consistently. I don't like the taste of them. It's not that I won't eat them or can't eat them. It's just they taste disgusting to me. Yeah. Trying things multiple times has really been useful because there have been things I thought were disgusting in the past that I really have come to enjoy. And going out to restaurants, the funny thing is I love good food. I mean, I really do love good food despite being incredibly picky. So one of the things that I often do when I go out for food is I ask the waiter or waitress for their recommendations on specials, or I give them a couple options that I think I'm curious about and have them make a recommendation, and that's how I decide what to try.
Well, way to go, Zach.
Absolutely.
What do you think of that strategy, Nancy?
No, I love it. I mean, I think that, it raises a bunch of points. One is that I do find that, when these adult picky eaters have kind of developed a way to master this, because they're so sensitive to the taste and textures, right, they become a foodie, right? They really appreciate kind of the minute aspects of food and fine food. And I love that, that Zach's strategy is just kind of like to try to turn off his mind a little bit and kind of do a deep dive in and then and kind of experience the flavor and then kind of just step back and kind of see what that's like for him. Like he's kind of figured out how to do almost what we call a mindfulness-based approach, where he's just really kind of focusing on the experience of eating and trying not to prejudge it, which is just fantastic that his wife and he have developed that strategy.
Yeah, and you can be someone who might not like a certain food just because you don't like the taste of that certain food.
Right, and you can really and that can get your stomach all clenched up, and you can just like, oh, geez. And so the fact that he doesn't know the ingredients, I think, is brilliant.
Yeah, but he found consistently, even though he didn't know, that when he ate something that had red or green peppers, he didn't like it.
Yeah, so he felt legitimate.
Yeah, I will say, Zach, I almost hate to bring this up again. Some people tell me that the red and green peppers are kind of along the lines of the onion and garlic to to some people, that they just have a little bit of an intolerance to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that is another one that Rob can have a little bit of green pepper, but not a lot. But I like that. And what do you think of the theory that Mom served really gross stuff like blood sausage?
I just feel so bad for the poor guy. Yeah, I think there's I think it's probably two things. One is that Zach probably had these taste sensitivities so he's more sensitive to the disgusting aspects of those foods. But I think it is absolutely the case that the emotional context of your eating environment, whether you have kind of a positive experience about eating and looking forward to meals, is an added layer to the whole picky eating thing.
So, Zach, do you eat beets now?
I've tried them many times in hopes that they would, start to grow on me, and they just taste like solid dirt to me. I'm still working on any kind of appreciation for them.
Thank you for calling, Zach. I needed that. Yeah, I actually do like beets, but I hated them as a kid. Now I like them. Jennifer in Shawano. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Yes, Jennifer, go ahead.
I'm a 46-year-old picky eater. I have been picky all my life. My parents tried really hard. It's vegetables. Always tried to make me eat a little bit of whatever vegetable was on the table, but they would make me gag, and I would have to, chew them on the side of my mouth and wash them down with a bunch of milk. And I've gotten somewhat better. I'm still struggling. I still don't like vegetables. I still can't develop a craving for them. I can choke them down. I can eat them in things. But the other day I was noticing I was eating some squash my husband had made with butter and brown sugar and some bacon bits, which are all things I love. And I was enjoying the taste. But as soon as I started thinking about it, my gag reflex kicked in again, and I'm gagging just thinking about what I was eating. So I thought it was really interesting what Zach said about mindfulness and just being really exploring, being mindful of the taste and the texture without thinking too much about what I'm eating. That seems to help.
Yeah. No, that's a wonderful example. So what would you say? Would you say that your parents making you, because that's such a classic strategy, your parents making you take a bite of vegetable at the table and that being aversive, do you feel like that helped you or hurt you? Because I always want, in terms of parents are always asking me whether they should do that.
Right. I don't think it helped. And now with my own kids, I find myself letting them off the hook because I remember what an awful experience that was for me and how physically difficult it was and just psychologically a struggle. And so I just remember that, and if they don't want to eat something, I'm like, okay,
Yeah. And it's
fine. I try to make them try things, but if they don't like it, I don't try to keep forcing them to eat it, I guess.
Do you notice, Jennifer, if your kids, hate vegetables as much as you did or do?
They'll eat a little bit better than I did, but my husband likes vegetables, so maybe they didn't inherit it from me. I don't know. Is there any evidence that it's
No. I should ask our guest, Nancy.
Yeah, I know the inheritance part is interesting in terms of we're understanding more, I think, about the biology of taste, right, and that certain kind of taste profiles can be inherited. But what brings a lot of individual adult picky eaters to treatment is exactly that, this worry that they're going to be a poor role model for their kids, and that their kids are already sensitive to foods, and how to help their kids not suffer the way that they've been suffering. Yeah. So it's nice that your husband likes vegetables.
Well, it's interesting too. It sounded like Jennifer, as a kid, figured out that how to avoid her gag reflex on her own by eating kind of on the side of her mouth and washing it down. It sounded like she was avoiding that center of the tongue.
Exactly. Absolutely. I know. You've got a lot of really clever callers.
Yeah. So what do you, Nancy, all right, so Jennifer is, I mean, she's not completely over that aversion to vegetables, but I mean, what advice would you have for an adult picky eater like Jennifer?
Well, what I hope, first of all, is that the more people understand about adult picky eater, the more comfortable that they'll feel talking about it. Because I feel like the thing that gets in the way of adult picky eaters is the social piece that we talked about. And so the more understanding that there is, the less embarrassed people will be to describe what they have. So I'm so thankful, excuse me, to Jennifer for calling about this, because I think she's encouraging more people to share their stories, and just like she's doing, creating these positive eating experiences, pairing it with things that she already likes is a wonderful strategy. And it sounds like Jennifer's also doing a really good job of thinking about why is she doing this, and she's doing it so her kids have a wonderful role model, so meal times are more pleasurable. Having these kind of a higher purpose of why you're enduring a food that's aversive, I think, is also key.
Thanks, Jennifer, for the call. Joanna in Ripon is with us. Hi, Joanna.
Hi.
I'm sorry, it's Jonah. Go ahead.
No, it is Joanna.
Oh, okay.
Right. I'm 30 years old now. I have 3 of my own kids who are also kind of picky eaters. But from the time that I was eating food, from the time I was probably 6 months old, I have not eaten fruit at all. Most of it I've never tried, and the only way that I can describe it to most people is that it's almost a phobia. It's not just a dislike. It's like I get real anxiety around being around fruit, cutting it up or trying to pick it out at the grocery store or things like that. And so I'm a pastor, and so in order to get my job, I had to go through a psychological evaluation and spoke to a psychiatrist about it. And they said, well, if it's not harming your quality of life, then let it be, just live with it. But at this point, now that I have 3 of my own kids, and also that I'm in a kind of social environment where people will sometimes give me gifts that are fruit, or will serve a pie that's fruit or something like that, it is kind of hindering my quality of life. And
sure.
And I don't know how to deal with it. There are times where when I'm more relaxed, if I feel like I'm in a comfortable environment, I'm relaxed, and then I'm kind of able to get a little bit closer to trying it or to being around it. But in times when I'm anxious or stressed out, it can't even be on my mind. It's very, very bizarre.
Nancy, we have just a minute or so to go. Do you have a little advice for Joanna?
Yes, I'll give you 60 seconds worth of advice. So one of the things that people do when they think about phobias, so there's this strategy called systematic desensitization. You can look that up. And what it means is, if you think about all the different, the different stages of eating fruit, like seeing a picture of a fruit, smelling fruit, seeing an animated movie about fruit, what are the things that are easier and harder? And oftentimes it's about pairing those different steps with, just like you said, with relaxation or something pleasurable. So you're kind of doing some what we call reconditioning, some relearning about experiencing fruit in a more relaxed way. But you've got to be really patient with yourself and take it really slow. And again, you've already got, it sounds like you've got really wonderful, valued reasons about why you do this for your children, for your job, and so I think probably being a little more systematic with it may be helpful.
Well, this has been very helpful and enlightening. I really didn't have a full understanding or appreciation of picky eating. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Nancy Zucker, Associate Professor of Psychiatry, Behavioral Sciences at Duke University, the Director of the Duke Center for Eating Disorders. And more information on the Joy Cardine Show Facebook page. Thank you to Chris Molina, to Brianne Chasso, to Kai Brito, to Bill Martins for producing these programs. Thank you for listening. I'm Joy Cardine. This is the Ideas Network.